months while camping in order to save up enough money to get my kids off the campsites. Worked over at McKinsey Manor, came home, came back to the campsite, played camper, chopped wood, boiled water, turned around and got my kids cleaned up for school in the morning because Cottage Grove and Dorena Lake were the only places that would take my kids from the campsite by bus to a school. And that's how I did it. Now I've got a bus. Now I'm being harassed constantly for a bus. My kids are in a warmer place. We have a refrigerator. I'm a hell of a lot better off than most. And yet I'm still harassed until I find a place to settle. Need my veterans. I've been waiting 6 months for veterans. I'm guaranteed a veteran home I joined during Vietnam. It has difference. I'm jumping through hoops after hoop after. What was promised to me. I'm homeless. I'm not worth anything.
I think a lot of people end up homeless. You know, you don't have to be any kind of person, any certain kind of person. I know a lot of my friends that are, that have been evicted simply because they couldn't pay their rent, and they're all of a sudden with no place to live, and they're perfectly good people. They're good friends, just everyday people.
Always we've had people that have been unemployed or underemployed for some period of time, of course, be homeless. But over the last 2 or 3 years, we see, I think, more and more people who up until a very short time ago were fully employed and able to buy their own home.
I became homeless because of lack of work. I was living at home, and my folks couldn't afford to have me live there at the time. So I basically ended up on the streets. I lived in a car for a while. I lived in abandoned buildings. Wherever I could, out of the weather preferably. I never went down to the mission, but all the same I managed to survive.
In January of this year, Nepal was putting out 400 food boxes per month. That was a significant number for us. By June of this year, we were putting out over 1,000. We had hoped that by the time the summer ended, that we would see a tailing off and a plateauing of the increase in the number of individuals needing food boxes. That has not slowed down. We're still well above 1,000 and climbing again. As we move into the fall and winter, we know that will grow even further. The biggest growth area in food box distribution in this area that we're aware of is in families. First-time users that are resident in the community that are simply being squeezed too hard by the downturn in the economy.
I've been homeless since May of this year. We were purchasing a house from a private party up in Westboro above Oak Ridge. My husband's on workers' compensation, and on doctor's orders, the insurance company that is the provider paid for our move up here and then attempted to force us into taking a settlement by stopping payments that he was legally due. And they did this for a period of about 4 months, and we lost our house and became homeless. Fortunately, we had a camper. We're very lucky.
Back door before we ever decide to be homeless. Find another alternative to being homeless. It is not fun. It is for the first month or so. It's kind of fun. You meet lots of nice people, and after a while, even that gets a little bit boring when you're laying in your tent at night, freezing cold, and trying to figure out where is my next meal going to come from. It's not fun.
My name's Al Prowl, and I'm in Labor's Union Local 125. I've been doing that for probably 15 years now. Before that, I was a mechanic for about 20 years. I do building construction and also highway construction, preferably highway construction, and I'm an Oregon certified flagger. When I was working for Wildish, I worked for them for about 5 years. I almost got run over by an old guy in a truck and snapped my back, and I've had 2 back surgeries and 2 shoulder operations and 2 knee operations, but I'm in good health.
I didn't know a single person here who was homeless. They were born here. This is their home. They're citizens without addresses, yes, but they are not homeless. They are treated like refugees, yes, but they are not homeless. They have a home. This is it. They don't have shelters. That they don't have, but they are citizens. They don't have civil rights the way the laws are set up. They can't vote. They can't receive mail unless they go through elaborate things. Unless they set up elaborate support systems, they can't enjoy any of the benefits of regular citizens. But they are citizens.
Most of these single males that I deal with do not victimize the public. They are not burglars, they are not robbers, they are not rapists. Obviously there's the exception to that. Some of them are burglars, robbers, and rapists, but the vast majority are not. We talk about the Whitaker neighborhood in particular is where they're concentrated, mainly because of the Southern Pacific Railroad tracks, which brings in the Eugene Mission, which is located here where they can receive all the services that they need to survive. People are concerned in the Whitaker neighborhood about their safety, and the truth is that they're as safe here as they are anywhere in town. The transients, when they get into fights, when they commit the robberies, mostly they're robbing each other, they're beating on each other. They're not victimizing Joe Citizen out on the streets.
For those truly homeless individuals and families, there is a local safety net. But Jean Benson of Catholic Community Services and virtually all other social service workers would agree this net is frayed and overburdened, that it is trying to help too many with too little.
From my perspective, we see 3 different kinds of people in shelter. There are those people who for whatever the reason, simply lack the skills and the information, and they're the ones that we need to provide a lot of intensive and longer-term transitional services to. And then there are those people who just barely get by. Their income is pretty stable, they're working, but they don't have very many benefits, and any small emergency, any small financial interruption is going to put them at danger of being homeless. So those people are sometimes in shelter, maybe every other year. The third kind of family, and I think we're going to see an increase in these families, are those people who are right now seeing a major reduction in their earnings. And their income is being reduced. In most cases, rent is going up. Somewhere, they end up without the wherewithal to meet their own needs, and they too will be the new homeless.
Philip Wesley Haddon and my 5 children, my wife and I are here in Lane County in a shelter. How we ended up here is about a multitude of things, an accident, my daughter's heart condition, and the system, because of my daughter's heart condition, wouldn't let us have too many assets of anything. We owned our own home. We didn't owe nobody for it. We had our own vehicles. But through the time that we had to go to apply for federal assistance on her, because we could not afford over $100,000 worth of operation bills, we had to sell everything we owned and have nothing in order for us to get any help.
In addition to families, there are large numbers of veterans among the homeless. Some soldiers who have been in combat become permanent psychological refugees. Others suffer the rest of their lives from physical maladies incurred during wartime.
Americans in this country should be very, very ashamed of themselves. 1 out of every 3 homeless persons is a veteran. These are people that went out and offered their lives up so that you can live in peace here the way you want to live. And when you take away their legality as citizens and turn them into criminals, you are doing an injustice to your country, you're doing an injustice to them, you're doing an injustice to your children. The next generation may not be so willing to get up and fight for your rights when they watch the rights be taken away from others. I'm a disabled veteran. I'm homeless.
I was in the United States Marine Corps. I was in from 1965 until 70. I was in Vietnam at Khe Sanh during 67 and 68 during the Tet Offensive. And they figured that's where I came down with the contact with Agent Orange. I had my 2/3 of my stomach removed because of bleeding ulcers. I developed them while I was in the service. After I come back from Vietnam and I got stateside, I was being treated for bleeding ulcers, and eventually I had to have my stomach taken out. Then I had a liver bypass, and they put me on permanent Social Security disability. So basically I'm on a locked-in income. That's what I'll get all the time.
We've been homeless for a year and a half. I started off in Avila, Indiana as a sheet metal worker. And then I had a job prospect lined up here in Oregon, and my wife and I wanted to move here. And then Desert Storm came. The job fell through, and then the Desert Storm thing, and I signed up for the Army. Went in the day that Desert Storm started, I signed up. And I was discharged on May 20th for torn ligaments. And so here I am, the Army stiffed me. Last year when my job fell through, I ended up slash burning. And this year they wouldn't hire me because they found out why I was back, that I was injured. So nobody would take me on with any of the slash burning companies.
Well,
So
he's
now
still
I'm stuck.
disabled until December anyway, from the doctor. He's not supposed to work until after December.
We're going to be here all the winter, us and our 2 dogs. And maybe in the spring, someone will hire me then. If not, I don't know where we'll go from there.
Abusive situations. Oftentimes, it's the children who suffer most.
Low-income children grow up sometimes not knowing what new shoes might be, or good clothes of name brands, school supplies being bought. Then again, some low-income families make sure the children are prepared and could go out there and present themselves, so they don't face that. But then again, when they stand in the food line and they serve their free meal ticket, they go through a lot of changes. Maybe not in grade school, but they start in that middle school, and they're classed by their schoolmates and by the teachers. They, already then you get in high school, and most of the time the children don't want it. They will go without food. I've seen low-income kids go without their lunches because they don't want the other classmates to know that they're low income.
My kids are affected pretty bad because they're not used to living in this area. They're not used to living in a house like this. They're not used to the neighbors. There's a guy down there at number 3 about 4 weeks ago that was accused of being a child molester. And they call him, and he was here the other day, and it was like, I caught him walking off with Sam and Tabby, my 2 little girls, and it's like, this is the shit they let in here around people that are not all together here because they're in a really screwy situation. I mean, they're not thinking straight. You just kicked out of your house, your kids are going nuts, you've got them enrolled here, you got to take them out, put them here. and their money's screwy. You know, they don't know what they're going to do, where they're getting the next meal, and there's some fool walking off with your kids. You know, that's what, yeah, that's part of it right there.
The concept in fair housing law came out of situations that arose back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s in which we began to have significant kinds of segregation of housing in urban areas in the United States. There's an essential flaw in the Fair Housing Act that is the essential flaw in all of the way that we approach serving people with less money than the wealthy. And that essential flaw is that anybody who has the money to be in the market has the advantage of fair housing law. If you get the money to rent a $500 apartment, then almost for sure you will not be discriminated against. The difficulty and the sly aspect of it is that if you're poor and you don't have the market, the money to be in the market, or the money to buy a house or the down payment, then you got to take what you can get.
People do fall through the cracks. There's just no way that a person can live with public assistance. If I was in this town and I didn't have my husband and I was on public assistance, there's no way, absolutely no way. The rents are astronomical. $800 a month for a 3-bedroom house. That isn't even that good a condition. That's ridiculous. But it's so tight, they get it.
The two fastest growing segments of the homeless population are women with children who are on welfare and working families that are working and making minimum wage. If you are a welfare mother or father with 2 children, your welfare grant recently increased by $10 a month in July, is $442 a month cash. If you're a working class family making a minimum wage, you're going to take home after taxes about $623 per month. Clearly, those two categories of people cannot afford rents of $550 a month.
If people can't afford to rent a place to live, or if they can't afford even a small down payment to buy a house, then the floor upon which all the liberties that they might otherwise enjoy is gone, and they really don't they're really a subculture or a sub-piece of our community. And you see it all the time. You see people who really are like economic slaves in our community, who work full-time and can't afford to live here. Then it's like a abusive family that we live in, some kind of cultural abusive family, where we really turn our backs on our suffering brothers and sisters and set up some kind of theology, economic theology that says, well, they couldn't make it. And people who can't make it in this economic theology are considered to be subhuman and available to be economic slaves.
You just apply for the place and say, yeah, it's nice, yeah, we can use this, all right? And then they want the specifics. Okay, and you tell them, well, I'm on welfare. And immediately they tell you, well, I'm sorry, but we don't think you can afford this place. You have to make 3 times the amount of your income. We're not discriminating against you, mind you, all right, they tell you. But you have to make 3 times the amount of your income to rent here. And that's not considered discrimination.
In Lane County, there are over 3,000 families who are paying more than 75% of their income for rent.
Not only is no new housing being created, but existing low-income housing is being pulled out of use, and that we will just see more and more of that fallout. And when you couple that with the economic dysfunction in the community, the decline of forest products industry, the level of wages reflecting service industry jobs instead of technical jobs, we're seeing more and more families and individuals across the board being pulled out. It's definitely a problem that's growing.
It's estimated that across America, 2 to 3 million people are without homes this holiday season. In the next 15 years, nearly 20 million people are projected to face the grim prospect of living without shelter. Locally, 3,700 applicants are on a waiting list in the hopes of receiving assistance from the Lane County Housing Authority. The ailing economy is clearly at the root of homelessness. As unemployment figures continue to rise, many of the available jobs are low-paying service industry positions. Landlords set rents higher and higher at a pace that far outstrips wage increases.
Landlords would consider the fact that most of the people in Eugene-Springfield makes minimum wage, and consider that along with renting their houses. There's no way that you can rent a house for, if you receive $432 a month, that you can rent a house for $500. It's not conceivable. And so landlords need to consider either dropping their rents or starting something to help with the homeless problem.
For people already homeless, few shelter options are available. With its offer of food and a bed, the Eugene Mission is one privately operated response to needs in our community.
The mission is the mission of the churches, and the purpose is to get people in off the street that need lodging and food, and to bring them hope and comfort in the name of God.
But the mission is not for everyone.
Since I got here, I've been homeless with my children twice. And I did run into problems at the mission. I never really even considered it an option, because being a single dad with 3 girls and a boy, they would have sent my girls on one side, me and my boy on the other. And the last thing homeless people have, especially homeless families, is their family. And they will protect that above all else. And they won't take being split up. They won't take being separated and having small children put at risk where you have no control, no say, no nothing.
Recently released mental patients from Damish Hospital near Portland and ex-inmates of the Oregon State Corrections System sometimes wind up at the mission because of a lack of shelter alternatives.
There has been some violence around the mission under the Chambers Connector Bridge down by the river. It doesn't happen here in the mission, but what people need to realize is that the mission complex is over 7 acres here. We're a hotel, we're a restaurant, we're a clothing store, barber shop, workplace. So the mission is bigger than some towns in Oregon. And you're going to have some violence around, especially when people are referred to the mission, go to the mission. And if they're having behavior problems, then it'll happen around the mission.
But look around, there's a baby over there. Don't even have a place to live. There's a mother over there sleeping on the ground. If it wasn't for this mission, they'd be where? But we can spend billions and billions and millions of dollars a year on defense. Now, what does that tell you?
In addition to questionable government spending priorities, the poor are also affected by numerous social ills, including racism.
I work with Indians and Asians and Chicanos, as well as blacks who have problems with getting housing. Because a lot of times with black people, when they go out to rent a house, you're usually denied just because of the color of your skin. The Indian family that I've been working with, they have been denied because of how they look, because they have long hair.
The reason for racism is economics. Okay, the system has pitted one group of people against another for an economic gain, and that is why racism exists. The system has taken people's natural fear of each other and people's natural prejudices about each other and utilized that to divide us for economic gain.
This pamphlet, produced a year ago by the Lane County Rental Owners Association, characterizes migrant workers and illegal immigrants as routinely being involved with the drug trade.
Homelessness is an occupational hazard of migrant work. There's no health care. There's no education. They have to piss out behind a bush. Where do women go to the bathroom out there in those fields? you know, in front of all those men and stuff. And then when these people, you know, they line up at the employment office, or they line up at Social Security, or they line up at welfare, and they want what other poor people here are entitled to, and they say, hey, you're a wetback. You know, you're illegal. You don't belong here. You don't get our benefits. Those are for American workers. You know, well, excuse me, I've just been working all day in the fields. You know, I've been breaking my back in the fields to put food on your table. And then you tell us we can't get any benefits. And that's not fair, and that's racism. You know, I just saw a 17-year-old boy yesterday get picked up by immigration yesterday, you know, and it's not a pretty sight, man. You know, and the kid's only crime was that he was here without any papers. Well, I wish the Indians had asked these people coming over on the boats for their papers, you know. Maybe we would understand that.
To escape the pressures and danger of being without shelter in the city, many homeless people have turned to rural camping as an alternative. One of the larger local camps was situated on the northern bank of the Mackenzie River near Armitage Park.
As you see, there's a lot of gravel around, and this was basically the bed and the resting place for 46 families here. The average family size was approximately 5. We had some senior citizens here who could not afford their nursing homes any longer. There were 2 that I recall. There were 19 cars that were being lived out of. As I said, there were tents from wall to wall. They had group cooks, and the area that was closest to the trees is where the children slept basically at night. The area was patrolled. It was safe. I never heard of any particular instances of anyone getting into trouble or into harm. They shared everything they could.
In the fall of 1990, the Oregon State Lands Board gave homeless campers 30 days to vacate this site and begin the lonely search for a new place to stay. Within the city of Eugene, camping or overnight sleeping is prohibited under an ordinance known as the camping ban.
Legally, in Eugene, if you don't have shelter, you can't sleep. If you don't get to the mission by 4:30, you can't get a bed. So if you don't have a bed by 4:30 in this town, and you don't have a friend to sleep with, you don't have a house to sleep in, you don't have this, that, or the other thing, you are illegally sleeping if you go to sleep that night.
I myself have had that problem of illegal camping and been stopped by police and asked to move and almost received tickets for that, whether I was in a vehicle or in a tent. I think it's a really serious problem because you've got to go somewhere.
I think what the camping ban does is it recognizes that you cannot solve a tragic situation by creating another tragic situation. It's much better for us to build single-room occupancy living quarters. That costs money, but that's really the solution we're looking at. If we had significant single-room occupancy dwellings scattered throughout the communities, the urban areas, so that we don't have a concentration of people, then it would be far more dignified, it would be safer, and we'd be able to deal with this need in a humane way. Again, a lot of people say camping seems to be the answer, but nobody has ever come up with a place where it's worked, where the people who've been helped haven't become victims.
Within the jail, the City of Eugene contracts for 15 beds in the Lane County Jail. Those beds are filled with municipal offenders. When there's not enough municipal offenders in those beds, county offenders fill those beds. If those beds are filled with campers, burglars are matrixed out of the jail because those beds are available for county offenders when they're not filled by municipal offenders. We're putting campers in jail and matrixing burglars.
One thing it's important to remember that the police don't go out looking for the homeless to hassle. We respond to complaints. It's the same way we do river sweeps on the river during the summertime for the campers. The reason we do that is because Joe Citizen was down there and he saw a transient, and he's afraid his wife is going to be attacked on the bike path, and he calls the police complaining about a transient camp. Well, we have to respond to that, and so we do.
When the river is swept and tickets are given, things can get very rough. Your belongings can be thrown into the river. This may seem like it's not that big a deal, but if everything you own is there, That's like somebody coming up and taking away absolutely everything you own, your house, your car, your contacts. I mean, by that I mean your social contacts, everything you own, and throwing it in a river. That's what happens to these men. There is physical abuse if the slightest provocation, and sometimes we even doubt the provocation, in all honesty, is given. There is untold harassment, and yet no solution is offered.
And the problem is homelessness. The cure is us.
Responding to the lack of shelter for families, housing advocates in Eugene conducted a march in October of 1988 demanding shelter now. Out of this action, funding was acquired from Lane County to open a temporary shelter. The Opportunity Shelter served up to 14 women and their children at a time. When the temporarily funded shelter closed its doors 6 months later, 4 women and their 9 children found themselves on the street again. Faced with this prospect, they set up tents on the grounds of the defunct shelter. Their protest drew other homeless campers and hundreds of other supporters. Over the next 3 weeks, Eugene police made more than 3 dozen arrests, citing camping ban violations. Out of the ashes of the Opportunity Shelter protest arose a new plan to provide local families with temporary housing. More than 30 churches would take turns providing overnight shelter to 10 families at a time for 1 to 2 week periods. But after 3 years of often bitter struggle, such as that surrounding the Opportunity Shelter, local housing advocates can claim only modest gains. Of the 100-plus families seeking shelter in our area each month, more than 3/4 are still turned away.
In my view, we are at a war right now. We're at a war with the fact that the people in this country don't have the kind of services, they don't have the kind of jobs, they don't have the kind of access to the economic well-being that we used to. To me, that's a war.
Between 1981 and 1990, America's military budget doubled to over $300 billion. In this same period, funding for federal housing programs was cut by 80% to just $7 billion. These cuts ended many affordable housing programs. In addition, federal cuts slashed rural housing assistance and dramatically reduced housing subsidies for senior citizens.
The federal government and the state government have taken this very tragic social issue and dumped it on local governments. We know what to do. We'd like to build single-room occupancy facilities and be able to manage them properly. It costs a lot of money to do that. Is this to be a city problem? Is this a state problem? Is this a national problem? And how do we move from maybe building bombers and build beds instead?
There's no simple solutions on that particular one, but essentially is what we need to do is act as a community to change this. If we don't take it on as a personal and community responsibility, if we expect the government to solve these problems for us, we'll get nowhere, because the government is not, the federal government at least, does not have the capability at this point or the will to change that. We need to act locally to try and deal with these issues and creating housing stock and taking responsibility for the issue. And then we need to be lobbying nationally to get the federal government to accept more of that responsibility across the board.
Citizen dissatisfaction with government is nothing new, but in recent years, voters have expressed these feelings forcefully at the ballot box. In Oregon, the passage of Ballot Measure 5 will have implications for the social service system that are only now beginning to be understood.
I don't think the state has an understanding of what will happen July 1st, 1992, if the issue of Ballot Measure 5 is not adequately addressed. We will decimate what infrastructure does exist that isn't now meeting the needs, much less will meet the needs after Ballot Measure 5. It's a desperate situation, and I think the community needs to seriously look at what services we buy for what dollars.
These families need more than just shelter. They need a lot of social services. They need job training, employment referral, education referral, anger management, child care, alcohol and drug abuse training. A lot of social services. The problems are far more complex than just having some church volunteers address it. We need a comprehensive approach in which we provide both shelter and the services to help people break out of the cycle of homelessness. And only some sort of comprehensive community-wide approach is going to do that. Churches alone aren't going to do it.
It's something that we all have to deal with. We all pay the price of what's happening to people. We pay the cost in what's going to happen to the future generations. So, in every way, our whole society will pay. We may as well face that now and try to address it in some ways that do make sense.
I think that people need to work together, and I think that we need to come up with some good solutions, and I think that the people that are affected by this need to be part of that decision.
People in our community have shown a great deal of willingness to help people who have lost their home. The attitude of wanting to help is wonderful. We have to get sophisticated in our thinking about this problem, and the way that we get sophisticated is by talking with people that are working with homeless people right now. They're the ones that are seeing the reality. They're the ones that are seeing what works and what doesn't work. Consulting with them is the way that we are going to get effective services not only provided but institutionalized into our society.
Great. Oh, it is. It's good to
And there is no shortage of ways to help. Springfield Mayor Bill Morissette is involved with Habitat for Humanity, a national organization dedicated to helping low-income families build and purchase affordable housing in cities across America.
The person who receives the house has to do sweat equity. They have to start out with 500 hours before they even move into it. And then they are expected to continue to be part of the nurturing family of other Habitat recipients. And now I think that is the way that the homeless people have to be involved. They have to participate in the building of it. They have to become nurturers themselves and continue to work in the movement. And as people pass through that, they become whole and develop their self-esteem and are nurturers of other people who need help, and that's the way it's done.
Another program that is making a difference in Lane County is the Relief Nursery. Of the current participants in this private organization's programs, 100% are homeless. More than 200 families remain on the nursery's waiting list.
The Relief Nursery is a program that started in terms of trying to find and answer early intervention services for children who are at risk or who were victims of child abuse and neglect, and it's an attempt to intervene and break that cycle of abuse. We have our most recent mother who we've brought into the program reported that she had just received her children back from foster care, and she was living in Cottage Grove. She'd been trying to get into the nursery for almost a year. The children are now back and in her custody, and she's gone without sleep for 37 nights, unable to meet their needs, unable to handle the situation, and she is suffering from a mental illness. And we got her into the nursery just to provide her 2 or 3 days of respite for those hours that she can have some time to herself and regroup, and then provide family support services so that if she is in fact in a position to keep those children, she has support services and some relief. But there are so few social services out there to meet the needs of families that are suffering, and we need simply in this community to better address those needs.
You know any places for rent around here?
No, I'm from Alaska.
Perhaps the most innovative local approach to dealing with problems homeless people face can be found here, in the heart of the Whitaker neighborhood at Blair Necessities.
It's just we try to help people sustain their own lives. We try to give them an opportunity to help themselves.
Samantha Wolf and her husband George were once homeless. They created Blair Necessities to fill a need they observed in their neighborhood. Tired of hearing how difficult it was to fund such a venture, they opened it with scant savings and have since relied entirely on community donations and volunteers.
Oh, we have clothes, we have haircuts, we have furniture, bus tokens, telephone services, mail room, our bike program, which is a big hit, probably more so than I'd really like to be involved with. people donate bikes to us, and we loan them out to people to get jobs or to ride around the park. I don't know where they go when they leave here, but we've gotten 7 people that have jobs now with using the bicycles, where they wouldn't have transportation any other way because they don't have a car. They don't have money for bus tokens.
So when they come in here, they can relax and be themselves. You know, if they say, I need a coffee pot, we know they need a coffee pot. They wouldn't come in here, you know, to get a second coffee pot. That'd be absurd. These are all people who want to be honest. So when they're given the chance, they're honest. You know, they just, things come in and out here. People have something they don't need, they bring it in, and we don't tag it. You know, the manager doesn't look at it. It's not stashed away. It's just put out, and if someone else comes in, they say, oh, I need one of those. They just take it. I think it's the way things ought to be. I think the dollar in this country has replaced trust, and I think we're proving in a small way that trust can work.
A fundamental respect for human dignity is the foundation upon which the work of Blair Necessities is built. Yet respect is something often withheld from our citizens without addresses.
My phone number is at the mission. That is my message phone. I come by there every now and then, and I look at the board to see if I've got a message. Well, employers don't like that. That to them is a sign that you are a transient. Well, there was somebody else that was a transient, and his name was Jesus Christ, and we're celebrating his birthday, supposedly. I wish people would stop being so hypocritical and start actually heeding the words rather than just parroting the words.
I think that people, when they're afraid of something, have a tendency to lay the blame on the victim rather than the true cause of the problem, and I think that people should stop and maybe re-examine their feelings towards people who are doing less well. You know, one thing I would say, when you see somebody walking down the street who's dirty and hasn't had a shower, you've got to remember that that's not an illness. It's just that the person needs a shower. It's not something that you can catch. It's something they're in need of, and it should be provided to them. It's not something that should scare you.
We live in a changing society. The jobs that used to carry our society, the blue collar, the enfranchised blue collar that used to be called our middle class, are being rapidly disenfranchised. It's because we've got a changing technology and that we're trying to professionalize everybody. I consider it like it's like a toothpaste in a tube. And as the squeeze comes on the middle class, because the jobs are being, either you have to be a professional or else you're going to be service, the middle is going away. The high-paying blue collar is being squeezed out. As that happens, the few that go up get a good service. They get a lot of money, and they end up being very viable, and they're very successful. But as what's happening is that the majority of the blue collar is not going up. The majority of the population is going down. And as that happens, we're having more and more casualties from our traditional blue collar and middle class squeezed downward. That's a bomb waiting to explode.
This is my planet. And I refuse to be kicked off of my own planet, man. I've made a stand. This is my planet. I will stand firm. Yeah, you bet. We will fight them on the beaches. We will fight them on the mountains. We shall never surrender.
She spends her nights in a shelter and her days on the streets, looking for a permanent place. Nobody wants kids and the rents are so high, each door just gets slammed in her face. She tries to stay cheerful and stay on her feet, but sometimes she don't know what for. About the time she hears her 100th no, this voice inside her just roars. She sings, I can't stand this, I just can't stand this, I can't stand this anymore. She's singing for her children now, I can't stand this, I just can't stand this, I can't stand this anymore. Sometimes she wonders how it got this bad, or why she's supposed to go it alone. And sometimes she feels like she'd sell her soul just to be sleeping at home. And sometimes she feels like nobody cares, or maybe they just don't understand. Or maybe they're too busy looking out for themselves. This whole place is just out of hand. But she sings, I can't stand this. I just can't stand this. I can't stand this anymore. She's singing for her children now. I can't stand this. I just can't stand this. I can't stand this anymore. Sometimes she wonders about those millions of women who are trying hard to stay off the streets, doing what they can to raise their children right in a world where you're supposed to compete. Sometimes she dreams they'd all join hands and march like an army to war, shoulder to shoulder across this broad land, singing we just can't stand anymore. Sing it now. We can't stand this. We just can't stand this. We can't stand this anymore. We're singing for our children now. We can't stand this. We just can't stand this. We can't stand this anymore. We won't stand this. We just won't stand this. We won't stand this anymore. Singing for our children now. We won't stand this. We just won't